Okay, class. So this is the fourth module in this lecture on, or fourth mini lecture in this lecture on science and technology and food for the week of November 16th to 20th. So we're going to focus right now on, as I said, there are other issues about glyphosate that cause concern, like its effect on non-target organisms, its cost, and the fact that it's managed by a company which also produces a glyphosate-resistant crop, so it gives them a large influence. Now I'm going to focus on this health effects because it's really a lot is developing rapidly and a lot in the last year. People have been very worried about these health effects, and for many, many years, relatively little information was available on the health effects of glyphosate. It was so large that people didn't know how you would develop the counterfactual. The evidence that was being produced was from a small number of relatively minor research projects. Most of the evidence that was available was actually financed by Monsanto as part of its licensing procedures and showed no negative health effects. So this has started to change about 3 years ago, about the accumulated evidence. This Van Bruggen article was published in 2018 in Science of the Total Environment, which did a systematic review of all the evidence. And what they found was that there was some evidence that glyphosate had accumulated in soils over time. Quite a bit of evidence, fairly strong evidence that glyphosate is taken up, and you can find it in the excreta of both animals and humans, though generally at levels which are not considered to be dangerous. But there was some evidence they had that long-term exposure to glyphosate at lower high levels could have other effects. So this was a bit of an equivocal response regarding low-level exposure. Zhang and colleagues in 2019 published this paper in Mutation Research, which focused, instead of focusing on low-level exposure, focused on high-level exposure, and whether and a single health effect, which is non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a type of cancer. So when they they did a new review of the evidence, and they came to the conclusion that the risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is 41% higher for groups that have the highest exposure to glyphosate. So an unacceptably high risk of contracting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma for people who who have been exposed to high levels of glyphosate. This another piece of evidence has led to a number of lawsuits against Monsanto, and a very, very famous case in the state of California when a school groundskeeper, Dwayne Johnson, was awarded $289 million for the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma type of cancer that he had, and that was tracked to be said to be caused by his high exposure to glyphosate. So this led to kind of a bevy and flurry of new cases. At the same time, about 2018 was when the German company Bayer had purchased Monsanto, and Bayer wanted to wanted to settle these various claims and not have its reputation having long-term damage from this glyphosate controversy. Law firms lined up to hear complaints and claims of contracting non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that might be associated with high exposure to glyphosate. 95,000 claims came together and one $10 billion settlement made to them. There still is, I see a report that there's still 30,000 additional claims have not been settled. The evidence still, though, is that there's no evidence that very low level exposure to glyphosate that you get, for example, through consumption of food made from Roundup Ready crops increases the risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to find evidence in the future. So this is a case where for technologies which has been used for about 30 years, now sort of the negative effects on health are catching up, and there's sort of a huge liability to the owners of Monsanto for this accumulated health effect. So I'd encourage you to, I think we're going to do this in our breakout sessions tomorrow, or the Zoom sessions, kind of look at the different way that this health effect is pitched by those who favor the development of transgenics and those who are strongly opposed. So there's a very strong alignment on either side of this, and now really certainly the people who are anti Monsanto and anti-big agriculture have much more kind of evidence to base their concerns on. So here's an overview I provide about the economic, ethical, and environmental effects of two technologies, glyphosate and transgenics, and then just the overall issue of the fact that we have a lot, because we have this privatization of the research for our food system in private hands, and there's a small number of those big companies that are mostly involved. So think about the ethical side of glyphosate. It's been developed by this big company. People see drawbacks of having big global companies kind of extending into the agricultural field. So Monsanto was originally a pharmaceutical company. Other people would say, well, there is a benefit of globalization because now, I get to choose from the global marketplace, right? So we just follow with glyphosate a bit, then carrying across to the other areas. Economics, it's seen as being cheaper than tillage. So if we had to, if we got rid of glyphosate, we didn't have a good alternative herbicide, then we would be tilling to get rid of our weeds. It would cost us more because we'd be putting more money into tillage equipment and into the energy sources to run our tillage equipment. On the other hand, people say, well, but this is a costly input. Glyphosate should be cheaper, and it has these health effects, which we see the kind of the magnitude of that, sort of the $10 billion price tag. The environmental side, the green indicates things that are positive. Having less tillage means less exposed soil. If we didn't use glyphosate, we'd use other chemicals which are worse. This monoculture should be in red. So monoculture means less diversity as an environmental effect. So the fact that glyphosate is part of a kind of monoculture agriculture that would be seen as negative for the environment. Another negative thing which is talked about is the fact that weeds develop resistance, though again, that might be that whatever else we're using will probably develop resistance as well. With transgenic, people say it's not natural, right? God didn't make. If God wanted us to have certain genes in different plants or different animals, then God would have made us that way. So this is a natural type of technology, and people kind of mucking about in the kind of fundamental building blocks of life. As transgenics grow, the genetic material can drift into the heritage of farmer-selected varieties, which may have been developed by farmers and communities over hundreds of years. On the positive side, transgenic can increase food supply, which therefore reduces price and the amount that consumers need to pay, as well as improving food quality. On the the positive side with transgenics is you can have reduced input crops. So we think about reduced insecticide costs and herbicide costs, increasing production. We don't need, these are fairly simple technologies. We don't need to make big changes in order to use them. For the environmental side, the negative effects might be a genetic drift into wild relatives. So the wild relatives of the crops might develop these characteristics. So we lose the integrity of those wild relatives, or elsewhere in the food system. On the positive side, it can transgenics can reduce pesticide use in cultivation. And then kind of what about the fact that we have our food system dominated by this small number of agro-industrial companies which are able to make large profits from developing these new technologies? There's a sense in ethics that there's a sense of a loss of self-control of communities and individual farmers, that profits are being made at the expense of a basic human right, the right to food, that we are, by the fact that, say, in the United States and Canada, transgenics are so used as transgenic foods are so used as ingredients as so many of our processed foods that we actually lose the right to choose GM-free food. On the other hand, people say, well, if you want to consume GM food, you ought to be able to buy it, right? So which sort of a right, so the right to choose, and that we also should think about the company's right to operate, to generate a profit. On the economic side, we certainly see the patents and the profits that companies can get who hold patents drive innovation. And as I said, we have to look no further than the COVID-19 vaccine candidates to see how that can work. There's large economies of scale. So the larger and larger and larger you can have our research and development on new technologies, the more and more effective it is. So as I said, larger is cheaper. On the negative side with the environment is that when you have these big players, consumers get very separated or distanced from the places where their food is produced, and therefore less cognizant of things like the environmental costs. Okay, so I'm going to stop this mini lecture here.